Monsieur Anber.
Monsieur Cassavant. Cheers, my brother. How are you? Everything okay?
One of these days, I'm going to have to bring on the mug that I always leave at the office because we could do a cheers. I can't do a cheers right now, but suffice it to say that the cup in the mug is a cool asset, and we're going to have it on. And you've been having it on for weeks now. Like I said, it's a staple of the program.
Do you know why I decided to bring it home instead of leave it at the office?
You're afraid somebody's going to leave with it or use it?
No, it's because every night when I talk to our manufacturers in Asia, which is a daily staple for my work, to speak to the manufacturers, find out what gloves are coming in, all the custom orders that we have going on. One of the things I do is share a cup of tea with them because it's their morning, my evening. So I share a cup of tea with them. So it comes in a lot handier here than at the office because I work till 2 or 3, so I get to use it. So yeah.
Well, and look, this is I believe the 13th edition. I don't know exactly where we're at with the Calling Russ Anber podcast conversations, and we're having a lot of fun. Last week we had Scully on as the first guest. We had a good chat, and it's available on YouTube, of course, and we do appreciate the comments, whether it's on Twitter, on Instagram, YouTube, and we're going to be having even more guests going forward here. And it's a period in boxing. There was a Showbox card this week, lesser profile fighters, but always entertaining matchups, always good matchmaking. And I think going forward, there's going to be some bigger events, but it's a bit of a quieter time, and there's going to be some news. And one of the people we wanted to have on, and he's going to be joining us here in a matter of moments, is Dan Rafael, who is probably the best in the last 20 years, I would say, maybe a bit more even, but a good 20 years now that he's been with the knowledgeable of the people, the contacts, the news, and guys like me and my friends who in high school and CJEP for Quebec here, which is kind of like post-high school for the rest of the world, but university, we'd go Friday, chats for Dan Rafael, the Fight Freak chats, the notebooks, the Monday scorecards. These were important part of following the boxing news. And I know that you've known Dan for quite a while. I met him at the Hopkins Jean-Pascal rematch years ago here in Montreal. I don't think he made too many trips to Montreal, but we could ask him. But I'm sure you've known Dan as well for quite a while.
Well, actually, in fact, when we were doing In This Corner, which would have been 2004, 2005, 2006, in that area, Dan was a regular guest on In This Corner. And that was when I first got to meet him on face-to-face on camera. And we became friends after that and end up meeting after that at fights, having met on TSN. So, yeah, the big guy's here. Dano.
Russ, my friend, how are you, baby?
I'm good, brother. How are you?
I'm great. It's great to be on with you.
I really appreciate doing this, and you came in at an affordable cost to us as well. So that's that's what I said.
Don't do that for just anybody, you know.
That's right. So I said it's affordable.
This is the COVID times, right, where everybody's getting flexibility, and we really appreciate that. And I think what's cool about having that on also tonight is that one of the news we want to get to, and Russ, this concerns you. It seems like you're going to be leading the way, probably of cut man or coaches or people who've been in the corner against Canelo, because Yildirim has an announcement, and it's Canelo against Yildirim. And Dan, I think you had the details, or you were the first ones to give us a bit of an insight here. So for people who are wondering, Canelo's coming back in the ring and rather quickly coming off the Callum Smith win.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing for the sport of boxing. You have arguably the number one pound-for-pound fighter and obviously the number one star who's going to stay very busy. Just fought, as Russ knows, December 19th against Callum Smith, won that decision, and won unified super middleweight world titles, won the Ring Magazine title. I mean, he clearly established himself as the guy in that weight class, but with more work to do because he wants to become the undisputed champion. But normally in our boxing days, that champion would take off 6 months, would not fight for a while as they try to line up the next fight, certainly at least several months. But Canelo Alvarez, because he only was able to fight once last year, and he's in his prime and wants to do the damage he can do in the super middleweight division and make a statement there. He's going to stay very active. He's a free agent. He's going to do short-term deals with promoters who can offer him the best opportunities. He worked out a 2-fight deal with Eddie Hearn. First up is the mandatory defense against Yildirim. I think we can all agree that Yildirim is a hard-nosed guy, and he's going to come to fight, and he's a veteran, but it's a different level, obviously. So I think most people view it as it's a mandatory, but also sort of a stay busy fight for Canelo. But the main thing is, if you're a boxing fan, the reason why it's so great was assuming if he wins Canelo, he's going to try to have, really, it could be as many as 5 fights in 12 months, the 4 fights, almost for sure in 10 months. You're talking about December against Callum, the February 27th fight against Yildirim down at the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, Florida. Then the second fight of that 2-fight agreement with Hearn, not done yet, but most likely another unification against Billy Joe Saunders, who holds the WBO title, an undefeated champion, has held belts in 2 weight classes, and that's on a Cinco de Mayo weekend. And if he wins that, now he's a free agent again. He can then do what he pleases, which presumably would be to try and negotiate some kind of agreement to fight the winner of the January 30th fight between Caleb Plant, who holds the IBF title, and Caleb Truax, who was his mandatory. And the winner of that will have that 4th belt if Canelo can get through those next couple of fights and set himself up for big business, and or even a 2-fight deal where you don't necessarily go right to the Plant fight. There's other guys in the super middleweight or in and around that weight class that PBC has that they could match him up with for that September fight. And there's been conversation that, if he runs the table, he wants to fight again in December. So you have 4 fights between the December just past fight against Callum Smith all the way through this coming December. You can't think, you got to go back. I mean, I can only go back to roughly like around the time of Oscar De La Hoya, when, I'm not talking about a regular champion or like a good fighter, I mean, a real superstar. You got to go back to 1997 when Oscar De La Hoya had 5 fights, I should say, in that year, at 140, and then moved up and fought for the title against Whitaker at 47 and won that, and then had some defenses. But highly unusual for a fighter of this level to have that kind of activity. I think it's great.
And so that I agree with what Dan says, Matt, because I thought that Timothy Bradley's comments were a little bit harsh today, saying that he shouldn't be fighting somebody like Yildirim, and I agree with you, Dan. I see you shaking your head there, and I think Yildirim, I don't want to say earned the shot, but he was owed the shot, and he's a tough guy, like Dan said. He'll come to fight, and you can't expect a star. If you want guys to fight all the time, they can't fight Jack the Giant Killer in every fight they have. That's just not going to happen. So I think he's earned the right to pick an opponent that he wants, and in this case, it's Yildirim. And I have to have broken. So I will have to be breaking some kind of record of being opposite him in 2 consecutive fights, right? At least in 2 consecutive fights, it's got to be something. So yeah.
But for those, sorry, Dan, here for Russ, for those who don't necessarily know who Yildirim is, because there's some backlash from this fight being announced, and theoretically, his last fight in 2019 for Yildirim against Anthony Durrell was a technical decision loss. And you were saying that you've been critical when Gamboa got the shot against Haney after losing to Tank Davis. And what do you want to explain, though, about what's different, though, for people who haven't seen the fight and don't know about Yildirim as to why, even though this was a technical decision loss officially, why he deserves the fight and what can he bring to the table here? Because
of the massive controversy surrounding the fight. Now, okay, it wasn't on a big scale. Okay, this wasn't something that was a pay-per-view event that this happened on. But I was in Yildirim's corner that night with Harold Knight. Okay. Yildirim was giving Durrell all he could handle. Believe me when I tell you, he was giving him all he could handle. And there's still 4 more rounds left in the fight. We thought we were in an even fight. Like, this is going back and forth. Durrell is fighting for his life. Yildirim is going at him. He's staying with him every step of the way. The WBC had open scoring, not to the fans, but to the corner at the end of each, a 4th round and the 8th round. Durrell had been cut earlier in the fight. The cut had not worsened and was not really even an issue. But as soon as the WBC scoring came out at the end of the 8th round and they saw that they were ahead on the scorecards, right away, he's cut, got to stop it. I can't stop the bleeding, got to stop it. And they stop it and they go to the scorecards. Ahmed Owner went nuts, but like Dan says, Ahmed can go nuts for anything. We know that, he's a good guy, right? But he can go nuts for anything. And he went crazy. He flew to Mexico. He took Yildirim with them. They took the tape with them. They did everything. And WBC said he would get his shot. This is his shot. This is payback for that. So
let me throw one thing in there. And I can't sit here and say like, this is some huge, great matchup and Yildirim's got a real serious chance to win. I get all that. But here's the main point. You're a superstar fighter like Canelo, and we just were talking about the activity level that's unparalleled compared to any of the other top guys out there. If you're going to fight 4 times in the span of 10 months, that's your plan, maybe even 5 times in the span of 1 year. Like Russ said, you can't expect the guy to fight the number 1 guy every single time. So if you're only going to fight once or twice a year and you're going to take on a Yildirim caliber mandatory opponent, I can understand why there'd be aggravation among media, among fans, among boxing people. And I get that. But if you're going to be an active fighter like that, then there's no problem having one of those types of fights in the middle. And it reminds me again, I'll bring up the De La Hoya example. He would have a big pay-per-view fight, and he would come back to live HBO against a good opponent, like, or a Yildirim type opponent, but not the superstar level guy, fight there, and then go back in the next big one back on pay-per-view. Now it's a little different because Canelo was on the streaming service DAZN, so you're not necessarily spending big money as a consumer to buy each fight. You're just subscribing. But let me tell you, if you're a Canelo fan, subscribing to DAZN, now granted he doesn't have a long-term contract with them anymore after what happened this past fall, but if Eddie Hearn has him, for the next 2 fights, and he just had him in the December fight, and you're subscribing, that means you get 3 Canelo fights from December until May. If you bought them as regular pay-per-views, that's like $80 times 3. So, do the math. It's not that hard. So I think it's good. And if he wants to slip in this kind of fight during a very busy stretch, so be it.
And Dan, I think isn't it funny how we can't get fight fans to ever be pleased about anything? I saw a lot of interaction when you kind of broke the news of people complaining Canelo is the next Mayweather 2.0, picking opponents. And this is a guy who, like you're saying, is trying to be active. He's just faced Callum Smith. And one of the wishes that you had, and we'll get to this a bit later in your boxing scene piece on the 2021 wishes, is getting Canelo to unify all belts at 168, which he wasn't able to do in these other divisions. I mean, people sometimes, I find with Canelo, you can't question that he's afraid of anyone or is ducking anyone. That to me is just ludicrous if you're saying that.
I totally agree. I have people that go on my Twitter feed and be like, he's ducking Andrade, he's ducking Charlo, and by the way, all 3 of those guys are tremendous fighters. And I'd love to see him fight, each and every one of those guys. But to suggest he's ducking, first of all, Charlo is a 160 pounder fighting on PBC who's never, shown an inclination to make the fight. I'm not saying Charlo was afraid. I'm sure he would love to do the match, but that's not anything better or worse than him fighting a Callum Smith or any of these other opponents he's been facing. Andrade, of course, is a very talented boxer. He's said he's willing to go up to 168, but he's not ducking the guy. Andrade is a tremendous fighter, but I don't know if he brings more or the same to the table as Billy Joe Saunders or Callum Smith or those guys. And to say he's ducking Benavidez, well, Benavidez, he's the one, and I love David as a fighter, but he messed himself up. He's the one that got stripped of the title twice, once for being caught with a positive cocaine test, and once because he couldn't make the weight. So he's got to do something to earn that shot back. And I think that fight will happen in the future. It's a great matchup. But to suggest that Canelo Alvarez, we could go down the laundry list of fighters at the top level he has faced, he's not ducking these guys. That's ridiculous. The bottom line is you can only fight one guy at a time. Right now he's doing his mandatory defense. He's got a game plan in place. It's mandatory, probably going to be a unification against Billy Joe Saunders, coming off of a fight against the undefeated guy who was the ring champion, and most people had him as number 1 in the division going into that fight, other than Canelo, and that was Callum Smith. So, in boxing, if fans are unhappy, they're not happy unless they're unhappy. Drives me crazy.
And and in fairness, you'd be hard pressed to find a fighter that has a more stellar list of opponents on his resume than Canelo Alvarez. I mean, his list reads like a who's who of boxing. And among active fighters, with all due respect, even to Triple G doesn't have the list on his name with all his title defenses that Canelo has on his. And I think that's just, Dan, unless you can think of someone off the top of your head who matches that kind of, star-studded record that Canelo has.
Of current active fighters, the only fighter that's even in the conversation, and frankly is probably the one guy that does trump Canelo in terms of the resume, is Manny Pacquiao. He's been around 20 plus years, and he's fought everybody from 122 pounds up to 150 pounds, really 47 pounds. I mean, but that's it. I mean, Floyd Mayweather, obviously, but Floyd is retired. He's doing these exhibition fights and that sort of thing. But I mean, no, of the current superstar fighters, still in their primes, it's certainly Canelo, and then Manny Pacquiao, of course, has to be respected for just an incredible resume that he's put together. Those are guys that drive the sport. I mean, every boxing fan should be thrilled to death that Canelo is going to try to fight, as many as 5 times in a calendar year, or with a 12-month span, I should say, because every time he fights, it's a big deal.
And you know what? He's earned the right. He's earned the right to pick who he wants to pick. The same way We talked earlier about in our last episode about Lomachenko. There are certain fighters that do things. They're a credit to the sport. They fight at the highest level against the highest opposition possible. They earn the right to make decisions of who they want to fight. And I think Canelo's in this exact situation as well. And if he wants to fight Yildirim, then he fights Yildirim and fights, like you said, 4 or 5 more times within a 12-month span. How can that be bad for boxing?
And it can't be. I mean, it's a great thing.
Yeah, and then what you were saying for the fight, I think a lot of fans are going to be looking forward to is if he does pass and he does win against Yildirim and doesn't have any injuries, there's no other issues, and the Billy Joe Saunders fight finally happens around Cinco de Mayo weekend. Me and Russ have this argument the last few weeks that I believe still that Triple G, a third fight, presents the biggest challenge to Canelo. Others have think, he had his chance and Canelo is just improving. Triple G is declining. The third fight would be an easier win for Canelo. And that Billy Joe Saunders is right now the toughest opponent out there for Canelo. Do you agree with that? Or do you think there's somebody out there who would present a tougher challenge for Canelo?
I think if Canelo decides that he wants to do another trip up to the light heavyweight division, he can find some problems against some of the big, strong guys in that weight class, like the Better BF type matchup, or even some other fighters that might give him some problems. But if he's going to stick to, at the moment, fighting fighters at 168, and he said when he made the move and vacated the 160-pound title not that long ago that he was done in that weight class. He said after the Callum Smith fight, he said, yeah, he could still make 160, but his heart's not in it. He's a 68-pounder and he looks great at the weight. He's done what he could do at 160. If there's going to be a third Triple G fight, obviously he's going to have to come up and weight a little bit. Maybe they'll, I guess it's not out of the realm that they could do some kind of catch weight, but it would still be for the titles that Canelo holds. I think that if they fight a third time, based on the way that Triple G has looked in his last couple of fights, got touched up real bad against Deverenchenko, even though he won. A lot of people thought he lost that fight.
Yeah.
Took apart Zarameta very easily, but I didn't think he looked particularly that great in that fight. He looked kind of slow, I thought. Good performance because he did what he's supposed to do. But, when I watched that and I watched the way that Canelo just like a machine took apart, a sturdy, good guy, good fighter like Callum Smith. I'm not saying Callum Smith was pound for pound, but he's a very reputable, undefeated fighter, much larger than him. It wasn't even a fight. I mean, and he's done that time and again. I think that at this stage of the game, it would be easier for Canelo against Triple G in the third fight. I feel like Canelo still is putting wrinkles into his game, and Triple G is basically a finished product. And, I'm not saying Triple G is not still an elite fighter, but it's very obvious. And I don't say this to, as a hater of Triple G. You're not going to find too many bigger Triple G fans than me, or Canelo fans. But Golovkin is not what he was just a couple of years ago. That's normal. That's boxing. That's aged. I mean, as they say, Father Time is undefeated, period.
Yeah, that's what we said. And if you made the comparison with both of them fighting on the same weekend, Golovkin looked good beating, what's his name?
Zarameta.
Canelo looked outstanding beating the number one guy, the other reigning world champion. That's a big difference of looking good.
Oh, no question about it. I mean, the people that want to nitpick will say, well, yeah, Callum Smith was the champ and Callum Smith was undefeated and all that, but he really didn't deserve the win against John Ryder. He wasn't as good as what people thought he was. He really is only considered that because he had a win against George Groves. Well, he did have a win against George Groves. It was a knockout win, and he got through the tournament and he won, maybe not against, superstar pound for pound fighters, but he ran the table in the World Boxing Super Series.
That's right.
Was when they got to the end of the tournament, it was the two best guys, standing at the end of that tournament, which it pretty much was between Groves and Callum. And Callum didn't just win the fight; he knocked him out and won that tournament, won that title. And what your resume is counts. So yeah, I mean, it was a close fight against Ryder. I can understand. I watched that fight. I can see people thinking that maybe John, eked it out, or that Callum eked it out. But he still got his hand raised. And at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez, his goal was not to fight Callum Smith. He wanted to fight for the world championship in that weight class. He did it. He won the WBA title. He won the ring title. He got the vacant WBC title. And he wins against another undefeated guy who was much larger and looked, as you said, Russ, absolutely outstanding in the fight. And, Canelo just, for some people, no matter what he does, he could fight Callum Smith and Triple G and Mike Tyson all in the same night, and they wouldn't give him credit.
And before I transition to some other big fights here that are near the process of being finalized, which are going to excite fans, is you mentioned, Russ, the open scoring for Yildirim's last fight, and it's something I know for years that Dan, you've been writing about as well. What is the thought process to have open scoring? And some people I've seen are still in favor of it. They would like to see more of it, but I think as hardcore fight fans and people who've been following the sport for decades, I think we're all in agreement that overall it's not a good thing to have open scoring. It takes away from the suspense of the fight. Does it not?
You want it first, Dan? Go ahead.
I'll take it first. I mean, I'm on record and have said, any number of times for as many years as I've been covering professional boxing, going on 21 years, that I despise open scoring. It does detract from the excitement level. To me, I don't think it helps change. It's not like it's going to suddenly, if you could tell me that having open scoring was to make judging better, that's a different story. All it does is piss you off more during the fight that they're doing it wrong. So let me aggravate it at the end of the fight instead of at the end of the fourth round and at the end of the eighth round and then again at the end of the fight. I just don't think it does anything to enhance the sport. I remember when open scoring was broached at one point, I want to say it was real early on, and this is like maybe, I think it was after Shane Mosley had gotten the win in the rematch against De La Hoya. And I remember having a conversation. I was still working at USA Today, and I was talking to Shane, and we were discussing open scoring, and he made a comment that's always stuck in my mind. One of the reasons why I hate open scoring. He said, if I know I'm ahead after 8 rounds of a fight, I know that I can go 4 rounds and not get touched. And that, not everybody was the caliber of athlete or boxer, or intelligent boxer that Shane Mosley was, but it just goes to show you that if the fighter knows he's ahead, Shane knew that he could sit on the lead and just do enough to get by. And who would want to watch that? Just to watch a guy just get by. You want guys to be able to put the foot on the gas if they think they're behind, or go for the knockout or whatever. And let's find out what happened at the end of the fight. Again, if I knew that it was going to make judging better, I'd be all for it. But all it does is if their judging is not the way that you see the fight on that given night, it's just going to irritate you every time you hear the scores.
100%. The solution to me is not if you're going to have open scoring or not. The solution is, how do you make judges accountable for their scorecards? How do they keep coming back after producing bad scorecards? They have to be accountable. I think the fact that we can just leave them render their decision and without any consequence, I think doesn't do justice to the sport. And once again, whether it's that rule, whether it's open scoring, whether it's the technical cut rule, where there was a while that they didn't say it was at the end of 4 rounds being completed that they could stop it. It used to be the bell had to ring for the 5th round, which was insane. And I remember when Marco Antonio Barrera fought Amir Khan, they got cut early. It was vicious, terrible. They let the fight go all the way through till the bell rang for the 5th round, and then stopped it just so they could render a verdict. It was so blatantly obvious. So every time a rule is brought in that you hope to do good, you can rest assured that you will find someone who will find a way to deviate from that and use it to their advantage. And that's what's bad. And that was what the bad thing. Ahmed Owner would not have said a word had Yildirim lost a decision. If he thought he lost the fight at the end of 12 rounds, or he lost the fight, okay, fine. But for him to bail like that, after the cut wasn't worse in the 9th than it was in the 8th, the 7th, or the 6th, it wasn't any worse. And you bail just to get the technical decision win. Again, you used something to your advantage, and it was a form of cheating, if you will. And that's not fair. The same thing with the how we apply rules and not hold judges accountable for the scorecards that they render. That's how you're going to fix bad judging.
Let me say one thing about that, Russ. You make a good point. I mean, in all the championship fights I have covered, hundreds, never one time, ever, not even to a pool reporter, like one reporter to go get the comments for the whole group like they do sometimes in Major League Baseball. Never once that I can recall. And I've covered, like I said, basically every big fight that there's been, for 2 decades, where they ever brought a judge to a press conference or were allowed to have a reporter speak to a judge for the pool.
Right.
Just to not even to like criticize them, but just to give their assessment of what they were seeing in a controversial situation. You just don't have the judges accountable, and it doesn't do enough to have, a generic comment from a commissioner, that sits on the
Yeah, the head of the commission.
Nevada Commission, New York Commission, whatever, Texas Commission, where they'd speak for it. In baseball, there have been times where they'll allow a pool reporter to speak to an umpire about a call and that sort of thing. Not to badger them, not to be belligerent, but just to get their take to deliver their view to the public. In boxing, I know a lot of judges, on a not, I won't say personal, like we're friends and stuff, but who I've seen in hotels and you see at fights and you talk to them and this and that, but not for interviews in terms of like giving their view on how they scored a fight. And I think that would be a great thing if when that happens, they should have to face the music the same way the trainer does, or the boxer does, or the promoter does. Why not?
Absolutely. Why shouldn't they? Because the moment you tell me, no, we can't talk to them, the moment you say, no, they're not accountable for what they do, the moment that, no, they're off limits, well, then you're just hiding something. There's no other, why couldn't you? If they believe they saw something a certain way, then stand by it. And if they can't,
just say, maybe I messed up. I'm going to go look at the tape again, whatever it is. I mean, look, Adelaide Bird, who's a nice lady. I've known her, not like personally, but I've met her and said hello to her and seen her at fights millions of times. She's a very nice lady, but she's had, some situations where, she clearly did not do a good job on a particular fight. CJ Ross, we can go on down the line of different judges that may have had a given bad night, and they're just not held accountable to the standpoint where they have to answer to the when I say answer to the media as we serve as the conduit to the fans.
100%, 100%. And for the fight fans who are looking to try and see and want to read up on where Dan's writing a lot of this news and the headlines, I think it's pretty cool, Russ. Also, it's Fight Freaks Unite is a thing. You can find it on Dan Rafael Substack.com. I think I'm saying it properly. I believe it's Substack, and you can get some notebook news. You can also read Dan's stuff, though, on different outlets, whether it's the Ring Magazine and Boxing Scene. And one of the pieces I read a few weeks ago was regarding the 2021 wishes, which is something I think, Dan, you've been doing for quite a few times. Always hopeful that there's going to be some big fights, some big changes. And one of the big fights, one of the first wishes Dan had, I think everyone agrees, is Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua for all the belts. And there was some developments in the last few days with Eddie Hearn saying they're close to a deal. Dan, how optimistic should fans be right now that this fight happens next, and it happens even with the pandemic within, let's say, the next 6 months or where are we at right now, do you think, officially with this fight?
I'm optimistic, but I've been optimistic a lot of times. And as I have said, I mean, I don't want to pour water on anybody's, good feelings about this. And I certainly hope that it happens. But, we've been down this road so many times. I always equate it to sort of the old Peanuts cartoon where you have Lucy holds the football. I'm not going to pull it away from you at the last minute this time. And then, of course, Charlie Brown, like the idiot that he is, goes and tries to kick the football. And what did she do? She pulls the football away again. So, I don't want to fall into that game again. But putting that aside, compared to some other ones that has happened with, it feels like this one is more real because you have both sides saying the right things. And there was things that need to be overcome to get to the point where they can actually do the fight. So one of the things that needed to be addressed was, okay, what's going to happen with Alexander Usyk, who was the WBO's mandatory? That's supposed to be the next fight for Anthony Joshua. Now, certainly they could make a fight and ignore Usyk's rights to the WBO title, in which case, I guess it would be vacated and he would just, fight against Tyson Fury for 3 of the belts. But the idea is here to have all the belts at stake plus the 2 best heavyweights. So, in recent days, there has been discussion. I don't know if it's done yet, but basically Usyk agreeing, I'm sure, for a good amount of money to stand aside and to maybe fight for the interim title against Joe Joyce, which is a great matchup also for heavyweight boxing fans, which would allow Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury to face each other with the winner of a Joyce fight against Usyk to be, in the position to fight the winner of the big fight. But the point is, they're now addressing that situation. The other situation had to be addressed was that Joshua had to get through the Kubrat Pulev mandatory. Well, he did that, and he did it in style back in December. He scored a big knockout and won pretty handily. So that's been taken care of. Now, the other part of it is on the Fury side is the Deontay Wilder third fight situation where supposedly there was a contract for the third fight. The Tyson Fury side says, well, that time frame for the option for the fight to take place had run out. So Deontay, based on the language in their agreement, took them to a mediation. I guess they were not able to settle that. So now it goes to arbitration. But But again, both sides feel confident. It seems like there's been some discussion from Wilder's team about doing some other fight with the realization finally, getting them that they're probably not going to get Tyson Fury in the next fight. So there's been some conversation of them doing some other fight. Charles Martin was a name that has come up, the former IBF champion. So they're inching along. Hearn and Arum say, they've agreed on the split financially. It's obviously a 2-fight deal. You don't do a fight this level without having, mutual rematch clauses. The pandemic does not help. Obviously, look, in normal times, this fight would be at Wembley Stadium. They'd have 90,000 people there, the way that Joshua had against Klitschko, which was an incredible atmosphere. I was there for that fight. It was like nothing I had ever seen. Things are different now. You can't have 90,000 people gathering in a stadium, unfortunately, because of the virus. So, but there is supposedly interest from other countries who are willing to spend, a zillion dollars to bring this event there and host it, whether, for a limited amount of fans or perhaps no fans, but put the event on to, bring publicity to their country, like they did when Joshua fought Ruiz in Saudi Arabia. That regime there has brought in a number of events to bring positive light to, an oppressive regime. Everybody that I know that attended that fight, media and different people associated said that everything was first class, that they treated them great, and, it was a good experience. So again, with Joshua and Fury, they're inching along. All the things that need to get done seem like they're getting done. But in boxing, you guys know it's not a deal till the ink is dry. And even then, sometimes there's questions.
To echo your sentiments, I was in Jeddah for Callum Smith and George Groves, and it was a first-class operation. I mean, it was so organized. It was unbelievable. One of the best organizations. The people were nice. I mean, we were really treated better than anywhere I've ever been treated before, especially by somebody who had never done this. How much of an importance do you think the belt situation is in the event that it's not for all 4 titles?
I mean, it's still a big fight, no matter what. I mean,
of course,
they're the 2 best heavyweights in the world. They're both, the champions. Tyson Fury, he's the lineal champion. He's got the WBC title. He's coming off, a devastating performance against Wilder. Joshua, has the other 3 belts. He is coming off an excellent performance against Pulev. He did what he had to do in terms to, follow a brilliant game plan from Rob McCracken, his trainer, in the rematch against Andrew Ruiz. I mean, they're the 2 best guys right now. I mean, period. And so the winner is going to be considered, universally as the heavyweight champion. But it would be nice if we could have a 4-belt heavyweight champion. So there's the word is undisputed. There'll be no dispute, because what happens when you have a guy that doesn't have all 4 belts, somebody else gets it and they're like, well, you may have, those titles, but I got the other one. You got to come see me if you want to really be undisputed. So, and I'm not naive enough to think that whoever wins the fight between Fury and Joshua, if it happens, is and they get all 4 belts, that they're going to just hold all those titles for a long, long time. Inevitably, when those undisputed fights happen, belts ultimately do get stripped away. A guy vacates, not in the heavyweight situation, but in other weight classes, guys end up moving up in weight. They vacate all of them. Terrence Crawford won, became the undisputed champ a few years ago, in the junior welterweight division. And what happened as soon as he won it, his next fight, he was fighting up in the welterweight division, and the fights and the belts all became vacant. So, but that happens. But the idea is that for one night anyway, we will know, every single person in the world who gives a damn about boxing whatsoever is going to know that there is a singular heavyweight champion of the world, period. No argument, no conversation, no discussion. I'm not even talking about secondary titles and interim titles. Those are the 2 guys. They got all the belts. They'll have the ring belt, and, end of story. So yeah, the fight is still a big deal, and it's still intriguing, and I still want to see it if it wasn't for each of the title belts. But they've come this far. We got one more. Let's get it on. That's the way I look. Just do it.
And I'll ask you guys, Russ and Dan, when people have been, ever since Fury's big win against Wilder in the rematch, and Joshua having his win against Pulev, that at times people were a bit maybe shaky, but he has that great finish, and he's an excellent finisher for the most part, Joshua. I'm still surprised in North America. It seems like the reaction when I talk to boxing people is that Fury is going to walk through Joshua, or maybe not walk through him, but he should be the big favorite. While you look at other places in the UK, some people think it's a closer fight, and we know styles make fights. You can't just base it off Fury and Wilder's performance, how it's going to translate to Joshua. But Russ, you're at first glance, you look at Fury and the confidence he displayed in the Wilder rematch compared to Joshua being obviously an excellent boxer, a good finisher, but not somebody who wants to engage probably in a slugfest. What's your impression? Do you agree with most people saying Fury deserves to be the favorite?
I don't know if he deserves to be the favorite. I don't know if Joshua deserves to be the favorite. I think being on home soil, levels the playing field a little bit. I think, though, like I've told you this before, I think Tyson Fury at his best at any time in history is a nightmare for anybody. I don't care who it is. He's that good. He's that nimble. He's that evasive. The one thing that he has succeeded in doing that Joshua has not succeeded in doing is he's gotten through his career relatively unscathed. Got shook once against Nevin Pacquiao, got dropped against Cunningham, but recovered and won, and got dropped against Wilder badly in that last round, got up, but has never been hurt and on the verge of being knocked out, and you never felt he's susceptible to being gone.
Sorry, Russ, just that I cuffed you. You forget the right hand left hook combination against Wilder in the first fight that
no, that's
he was
what
about
I said.
a second away from being knocked out.
No, but it's not like this doesn't happen to him. It's not like he's fragile. You don't expect that. It's not that he's shown this in his history of his fights. This is not, he got hit with those two bombs and got up, and might arguably have won that round. If you take away the fact that you automatically win a round on a knockdown, might argue and finish the fight stronger at the end than Wilder did. So that's the only thing I think Fury has going for him. And let's face it, he has proven successful against big guys. So is Joshua, but Fury has proven successful against massive guys like him. So that's why I think it's not easy for either of them. The only thing might be that Joshua might not have the worry of the thunder in Fury's fist, I don't want to say lack of punching power, but not the big bomb. It's more skill than bomb that Fury has that might, garnish some confidence in Joshua.
I mean, I think it's a great matchup. I think that Fury deserves to be at least a slight favorite, just because, like Russ said, like in terms of his overall skill package seems to be a little more, and that's not taking anything away from Joshua. I just feel like Fury he's more versatile, and he's got the size. Joshua is very good at what he does, but it's basic. It's, right hand jab. I mean, it's not complicated. It's not Fury can be a little complicated because he can do, as he showed in the Wilder fight, in the rematch, totally fought a different fight than the first fight. Instead of, and I have to say, when he was talking about the rematch in the lead up to the fight, he would say, well, I'm going to go right after him. I'm going to knock him out in 3 rounds. And we're all sort of like, looking at other reporters or hearing them or talking to them, we thought he was joking. Like, okay, well, why is he going to tell us his game plan? Boxers don't tell you their game plan. How many times have I been in a press conference or on a call with a guy and another reporter asks, some element of the question, like, well, how are you going to fight the guy? He's like, I'm not going to tell you my game plan. Tyson Fury came into that promotion, told everybody exactly what he was going to do, which was completely the opposite of the first fight, which was to box against the big puncher Wilder, because he felt like even though he didn't lose, he got a draw, even though he felt he won, it still wasn't good enough to get the win. So I got to do something different. He changed trainers and he fought in a style that he told us exactly what he was going to do. So he proved to people, I can fight Wilder very well, to the point where most people thought I won by boxing against him. But if it wasn't good enough, I'm going to change entirely. I'm going to go right to him, and I'm going to bring the heat. And that's what he did in the rematch. So he was able to be effective against Wilder fighting one way. And then he was even more effective fighting a brand new way that is not normally the way that Tyson Fury fights. But he's also susceptible, because even though he did a great job against Deontay Wilder in the rematch, I was there against Tom Schwartz, and those cuts were not from headbutts. They were from clean shots that landed all over his eyes and ripped them open. And, that fight was within a whisker of being stopped because of those cuts. The same way, it was a fraction of a second maybe of the fight being stopped by referee Jack Reese in the first fight when he got knocked down in the 12th round. So, as excellent as Fury is, he's kind of escaped a couple of losses, by the skin of his teeth.
But Dan, even in the fight with Schwartz, though, the cuts, yes, were bad, but he wasn't getting beat up like he was. It was a tough fight. He was bleeding, but he was winning the rounds. I don't think there's any doubt that he was. I was there. I was ringside for that fight. I never felt like, oh my God, he's going to lose this fight.
I was there too, and I'm not saying he was going to lose the fight because he was getting beat up. He lost a few rounds, but it was because the cuts were so severe, but the cuts were caused by punches.
Yeah.
That's boxing. I mean, I love, I hear people, well, he would have won the fight if he didn't get cut. Like, that counts. That's the old argument. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many times I've heard it. I covered the Lennox Lewis fight against Vitaly Klitschko, and Klitschko had the eye ripped up by Lennox Lewis. And, he was ahead on the scorecards, Vitaly Klitschko, when the fight was stopped. Close, but he was ahead by a point or two. And, how many times in the last number of years that people say, well, Klitschko would have won if they didn't stop the fight. He was ahead on the scorecards. I'm like, yeah, who cares? Meldrick Taylor was ahead on the scorecards and Chavez stopped them, whether you agree with the stoppage or not. My point is, what you were ahead by is irrelevant if you get knocked out. It's like, yeah, you were leading the baseball game till the dude hit the walk-off home run. Same kind of concept. So, but I think that both Joshua and Fury, in different manners, have certain vulnerabilities that the other guy might be able to exploit. It's a great matchup, and honestly, whoever the underdog is or the favorite is, I just want to see them get it on, and let's have a good fight, and let's produce an undisputed champion with all 4 belts, walking out of the ring with one guy after the fight.
Yeah, and you know what I love, Dan, about the Joshua and Russ, the Joshua Fury fight, is that even though it's European fighters, it's going to be a massive pay-per-view event everywhere. I think Fury's done a great job of being able to market himself across all platforms. It's going to be the biggest fight that can be made in boxing, probably even bigger, of course, than Crawford-Spence, which would be an excellent fight to see, but that one's probably even less likely, of course, to happen. And it brings me to the final point for kind of the discussion. Some of the things that have been brought up is these exhibitions, because this would be a big pay-per-view and a big matchup that's between 2 legitimate fighters, but we're seeing exhibitions become a thing. Conor McGregor is fighting in a UFC pay-per-view this weekend, and in his sport, he's fighting for the first time in a year in the UFC. But there's talks, of course, always of Jake Paul, a YouTuber, offering $50 million to fight Conor McGregor. And Conor's even talking about fighting possibly Manny Pacquiao in a boxing match this year. And I think Conor maybe was the first one to bring kind of this exhibition thing when he fought Floyd Mayweather to begin with, right? So people have interest for this. So Dan, let me ask you, first of all, do you like this exhibition thing, bringing new eyeballs to the sport, or do you think it hurts it ultimately? And what about McGregor-Pacquiao, realistic or not? And would he even have a chance if the fight does happen?
There's a lot of questions there, but back to the Mayweather, I mean, for better or for worse, it was not an exhibition. It was actually a sanctioned official fight. And if Manny Pacquiao and Conor were to link up, it would be an official fight, as opposed to like the Roy Jones match against Mike Tyson, or this discussion about possibly Tyson versus Holyfield, and some of these other bouts that are actual official exhibitions, in the sense that they have slightly modified rules. The commission's a little bit more stringent how the boxers can act. There's no official scoring, even though in the Jones Mike Tyson exhibition they had WBC celebrity judges that did a shitty job, in producing their draw, which was absurd. But in terms of Conor crossing over to boxing, brought a lot of eyeballs. It was the second most successful pay-per-view in the history of pay-per-view. I don't think it's bad for the sport. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of it just personally, but I get it. I mean, people are interested. I totally understood. Even though they were fighting under boxing rules, there was an intrigue to seeing how a superstar from MMA was going to do against the number 1 fighter in boxing. I still to this day question, whether the commission should have approved it, because of the fact that you were dealing with a guy, and the best fighter, in the world, against a guy that in boxing was 0-0, no matter how good he was in the sport of MMA. But, I'm over that. I mean, I don't really have a problem with it. If Manny Pacquiao at this stage of his career, we were just talking about who's got a better resume than Canelo, and the only guy I could come up with is Manny Pacquiao. If Manny Pacquiao rather wants to go and make a huge amount of money to do a fight against Conor McGregor in a boxing match, have at it. I mean, he's done everything you can possibly do in boxing for 20 plus years. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's one of the top probably, dozen fighters in the history of the sport. Go for it. Now, I'm not sure why the public would be that interested in it, to be quite honest, because I got it the first time around. Manny and Conor are not going to talk the same kind of trash that Floyd and Conor talk, because that's just not Manny Pacquiao's personality. I mean, Floyd and him made for just an explosion of viral moments and crazy conversation and crazy talk in the press tour. I was there in Brooklyn when they did the New York press stop. That was absolute insanity. That's not what you get with Manny Pacquiao. Manny's a more reserved individual. He's more of a humble individual. Manny doesn't get up there, and I've never heard Manny raise his voice. I've interviewed Manny 1,000 times. I've been around him. I've covered, a ton of his fights. I've never heard Manny Pacquiao raise his voice. I've certainly never heard him utter a curse word. Not to say he's never done it, and I'm not saying he's perfect, but that's just not the public persona that he puts forth. So, I'm not sure where the heat is going to come from in that fight. Conor can do all the talking he wants, but he already did it and got knocked out. Why is it going to be any different? He's not a boxer. So again, I'm not trying to, crap on the fight. If they make the fight and people want to buy it and pay for it, have that, and I'll write about it. And cool, but I don't really think that we need it. But if people are interested in the athletes and their handlers think there's an opportunity to make a money-making event, so be it.
I can see Manny sitting on the dais laughing his ass off when Conor's going to start talking. He's going to be like he's a fan listening and laughing at this stuff. It's not going to have an effect on him. It's not going to get to him. It's not going to bother him. So, but I think, though, Dan, I agree with you. I mean, you say, oh, if the fans want to see it, okay, that's good. I'm not sure that based on revenue streaming, which I know this is what it's all about, that is how decisions are made by athletic commissions. Like you're going to take a guy who's 0-1 and allow him to be matched against the great Manny Pacquiao. But now try to ask Brad Goodman if he could put that match together, trying to do a card in Vegas.
They let them do Mayweather versus Conor, and even though Conor got stopped, at least he acquitted himself reasonably well in that fight. Although I say to this day that Floyd Mayweather carried him.
For sure.
But still, Conor, he lost, but it turned out not to be an embarrassment. And so you can't approve 0-0 against Mayweather and not approve 0-1 against Pacquiao.
Right.
So we'll definitely approve the fight, given the fact of what happened in the first one. I have no doubt in my mind that the commission would approve that. But again, if I'm ambivalent about it. I mean, if they make it, no problem. If they don't make it, trust me, I'm going to be able to sleep well at night if they don't make it either.
I want to ask both of you a question. Is there any truth to the rumor? Was there $50 million on the table for McGregor to fight Jake Paul? Is that just talk?
Apparently it's legitimate. I don't know. Conor's dismissed it, but the money apparently is a legitimate check that Jake Paul got from whoever to put up the fight.
Dan?
I mean, if it's real, I don't know if it's real or not real, and I don't care.
Well, no, I mean, I care, because how do you walk away from that? If you're Conor McGregor, how do you walk away from $50 million unless you've got the Pacquiao fight all lined up? How do you walk away from $50 million when you have absolutely nothing to lose against this guy? Well, I
was gonna say, I mean, even if he had the Pacquiao fight lined up, I mean, you have to think that if you're Conor, you win against Jake Paul, who's not even a real boxer. I mean, again, I'm not knocking the hustle from Jake Paul, but Conor is a professional athlete, boxing or otherwise, MMA or otherwise. So if you're assessing, do I do 50 million against a guy, who was even less experienced than I was when I fought Floyd, or do I go and fight for a similar amount of money against a guy like Pacquiao? I mean, I guess he decided he wanted to do the Pacquiao. But now I'm not sure if you don't know the contract situation. If UFC was involved and didn't want to do the fight, they obviously have some control over how that happens. To me, to me, I don't know if we're living in the TMZ world and it's just some calling each other out, or if it's real or not. I mean, tell me when the fight's made, whoever he fights, and then I can get down with it.
Yeah, and related, something that's similar is that apparently in the last few hours here as we're recording this, Ryan Garcia has agreed to a boxing versus MMA bout against Dylan Dennis. Dylan Dennis is Conor McGregor's one of his best friends, training partner. Dylan Dennis is the guy that Khabib jumped the cage to go beat up. He's another guy who's always making noise on social media, never ends up fighting anybody. So I don't know what's going on, but clearly this is the social media world we're living in, and I think it's going to be not just a phase. I think we're going to see this going for probably a few years now, that these type of mega bouts, whether it's crossover exhibitions, whatever, it's here to stay. Unfortunately, in some cases, some people will say fortunately, depends what your cup of tea is, but clearly these guys are going after each other on social media constantly now.
There's a place for it. I think that's obvious. There's a place for it, but as long as it's not like the only thing. If Ryan Garcia wants to fight an MMA guy in a boxing match, if Conor and Pacquiao want to do their thing, if Jake Paul wants to do his thing, or Logan Paul wants to do his thing, Logan Paul's having this exhibition against Mayweather supposedly, there's a place for all of that. It's entertainment. If people want to pay for it, cool. But there's a place for that as long as we're still going to see fights like Fury and Wilder and the other top guys fighting. You go on down the schedule, Miguel Berchelt against Oscar Valdez,
Right.
You're a boxing fan, great, matchup between two, exciting fighters. I mean, we can go on down the schedule of what's coming up. I mean, there's the real boxing matches between the top guys, and then there's sort of what I look at as the sideshow. And if a superstar wants to go and involve himself in one of the sideshows because it can make a huge payday, who am I to argue with that? I would do the same thing. No problem.
And if people are paying for it, the only way it can happen is if people pay to see it. It can't happen otherwise. So if they're paying for it, okay, that means somebody wants to see it. No problem. Who are we to begrudge somebody for making a living? And I told you that when you asked me, Matt, right? I told you, Matt, when you asked me that, how many managers would love to have a kid who's a 4-rounder, let's like Jake Paul and Logan Paul, they're 4-round kids. How many would love to be able to have that kind of drawing power and be able to command that kind of money? And promoters happy to pay it because they know the money's coming in.
By the way, when I watched the Roy Jones, Mike Tyson exhibition, I thoroughly enjoyed it. First of all, there was real boxing, official boxing matches on the undercard. They weren't big names, but those fighters that fought on that undercard, they all gave it their effort. They all left that in the ring. They all put on a really good show. And again, the main event, and it wasn't Mike Tyson of old or Roy Jones in his prime. But I was entertained. The production was first class. I made the comment to a few people that the folks that did the production on that event was every bit as good as you see on any major boxing TV or pay-per-view. I don't care if we're talking about Showtime, HBO back in the day, or ESPN presently, or DAZN or whatever. As I come to find out later, some of the folks involved in that production were folks that used to do production for HBO. But the point is, they did a great job of making it look really good on TV. And I found it to be compelling. So in the right circumstance, I'm down for it. I'll be honest. If they make Tyson Holyfield in an exhibition, tell me where to send the money. I'll do it tomorrow. I'm in.
The only bad thing was Nate Robinson getting knocked out. That was because that would have been a match that probably would never have been approved. A commission wouldn't have, I shouldn't say wouldn't have been approved. As somebody who handled Nate Robinson and you were fighting this guy, you're a legitimate trainer, a legitimate manager. You look and say, nah, that guy's that's too tough for my kid. I can't put my kid in that fight. You wouldn't have made that match.
Yeah. That was not great. I agree with that. I mean, it was obviously a spectacular knockout, but on paper, you had one guy that was 1-0 taking on a guy that was 0-0. I mean, the commission did approve it. It was an official fight. I mean, so be it.
Well, look, there's going to be, like Dan says, a ton of fights to look forward to, as opposed to not only these exhibition. And we also want to thank you, Dan, for being here and with us tonight. We actually went, of course, a bit longer than anticipated, but we had a lot of fun. I think there's a lot of good stuff. And for those of you who want to continue to follow you on Twitter, of course, for your name with a lot of news and nuggets, but also, like I mentioned previously, whether it's on these different sites, but mostly the cool thing is that the Fight Fans, the Fight Freaks Unite is back. You're trying to get it back, and I hope it does continue because it's an awesome notebooks, scorecards, the chats maybe eventually will come back. That'll be fun. So Fight Freaks Unite, danrafael.substack.com would be the place to go read and subscribe to the newsletter.
Appreciate that, guys. Been great to be on with you, Russ. Man, I hope we can see each other in person soon enough. It's been too long.
I wore red for you tonight.
Why is that?
Who won the election?
Joe
Who got sworn in yesterday?
Joe Biden.
There you go.
I'm not sure what red has
to do with red.
Red is actually the Republican color in this country.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my bad. I should have worn the blue.
If you said I was wearing blue, if you were wearing blue, that's different,
Yeah.
No, I messed that up. I was thinking I was doing
So Russ, you clearly failed your U.S. history class there in U.S. politics class there. What were you talking about? You never noticed the red MAGA hats from Donald Trump for 4 years? You didn't notice that?
Yes. Now that you say it, I don't know why I thought it was red.
How about this? You're a brilliant boxing mind. I love it for your boxing knowledge. I love you as a guy. I love you as a pool player. As a political science major, not so much.
Yeah, maybe not. But red's the color of liberals here, so I just took it for granted.
Anyway, well, there you go. Next, I don't think you're going to get a call from MSNBC anytime soon, Russ, but boxing-wise, you're covered, and we'll be back next week. And thank you, everyone, for joining in, and thank you to Dan for being with us, and hope everyone has a good weekend, and we'll obviously do this next week. Calling Russ Anber. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Russ.
All right, guys.